What is it about kids? Those annoying little rugrats and curtain climbers that cause you nothing but misery, pain, and despair. Wouldn't it be great if you could do something about them? But you can't, can you? Because they're kids. Can't live with them, can't kill them. Or can you? Just in time for episode 28 of Pop Art, the podcast where my guest chooses a movie from popular culture and I'll select a film from the more art classic side of cinema with a connection to it. I am your I Want My Lavender Spats host, Howard Kasner. For my listeners, please like, follow, or comment. I'm especially looking for more reviews on iTunes, and I'd love to know what you think. Today, I'm happy to welcome back a returning guest who earlier joined me on Pop Art to discuss the Omen and Village of the Damned, Damien Riley. As someone especially interested in horror, I was thrilled to have him back for the Halloween episode. Damien has chosen perhaps the underrated non-Halloween Halloween movie, Halloween 3: Season of the Witch, while I have chosen the overlooked and also perhaps underrated Dr. Seuss fantasy musical, The 5,000 Fingers of Dr. T, both with diabolical plots aimed at children. To begin, Damien, why don't you remind us all something about yourself?
Well, it's so great to be on here with you, Howard. We have been on some Lamb shows and through the Twitterverse have batted ideas back and forth, and it's always great to be on your show. And I think your show's doing great. Did you say you have 26 episodes?
This is 28.
Unbelievable. You're getting to 30. That's amazing. I just love movies. Ever since I was a kid, so a good movie would come on. I used to like The Twilight Zone, which when we talk about the 5,000 Fingers movie, it somehow ignited in my brain the Twilight Zone. I'm a movie fan, and people who know me know that. I'm a teacher as well. I teach college English at the community college here by my house. I do that online right now because of COVID, so I'm pretty much in this chair quite a bit. And then also tutor K through 12 students for a company called Splash Learn, and I just love that. I'm a dad. I have 3 kids. I'm married. Sarah is my wonderful wife. I've just been doing this podcast called Riley on Film. I watch movies. I want to share about them, but my wife's sick of hearing it. So I talk to the Twitterverse and I talk to the podcastverse and the universe if they'll listen. I'm having so much fun with it, Howard.
With that, let's get to your selection.
Okay.
Halloween 3: Season of the Witch. First, some information about the film. Halloween 3: Season of the Witch was released in 1982. It was written and directed by Tommy Lee Wallace. It stars Tom Atkins, Stacey Nelkin, Dana Herlihy, Michael Curry, Ralph Street, J. Dean Barber, Brad Schachter, Garn Stevens, Nancy Kyes, and Mady Norman. The basic premise revolves around a mysterious warehouse in a small California town that produces the nation's most popular Halloween masks. So popular, there is nary a trick-or-treater who doesn't have one. But when a man being chased by a group of mysterious men in suits from the area makes it to a hospital, the doctor on call begins to suspect that there is something more going on than a simple murder and decides to go to the small town and investigate. But he only has until Halloween to stop whatever is going on. Why did you choose this film?
When I first saw this film, I was going through the Halloween movies in order. I was stricken right away waiting for Michael Myers to show up, and he didn't. I kept wondering, when are we going to see Michael Myers? What did you call this movie? You put something in.
It's the Halloween movie that's not a Halloween movie.
Yeah, it's part of a franchise, and yet it's completely out of the franchise. This one is completely not connected. That was interesting to me. And then as I watched it some more, I really liked the feeling of it. That's really what I look for in movies. I'm not saying that people that don't like horror don't like moodiness, because there's moodiness in all kinds of movies, of course. But for me, in horror, I mean, you could look on my letterbox. I'm Riley on Film there. And I've been rating horror films probably like 6 or 7 years. And the ones that are at the top, the ones that have the most stars, are the ones that have that. They have that moodiness to them that I'll go off and pull some weeds in my backyard and I still have that feeling, that moodiness. And this really had that. It was a little bit hokey, but even the low budget quality to it just sort of draws you into the town. And then you find out that kids are going to be killed. The fact that it brought me to a place where I didn't want to go. Now, I didn't give it a huge score, and I'll just go ahead and say that. I gave it a 6 out of 10, which for a horror movie is pretty good.
When did you first see it?
It would have been About 3 years ago, believe it or not, because I hadn't seen it when it came out or anything like that. Let's see what the year is. Like 82, so I was 12. Parents weren't having it. No way they would let me go to see something like this. I think it's rated R. Yeah, rated R. I had to wait till I'd earned the privilege of seeing what I wanted.
I first saw it a couple of years ago myself. It may have been a little longer, so I probably didn't see it at a much different time than you did. I was over at a friend's house. They were having bad movie nights, so I went and saw this. I did not see it when it came out because it did not get very good reviews at all. I was one of the few people who really didn't care for Halloween itself all that much. So when this didn't get very good reviews, I just didn't bother seeing it, especially since, as I knew beforehand, it had nothing to do with the previous two Halloween movies. Actually, I was pleasantly surprised. I am with you in that, no, it's certainly not a great movie, and it has its faults. It was not nearly the disaster that the reviewers or a bad movie night made me think it was going to be. And you're right, it has a good look. The cinematography and the director's eye, I thought was very strong. It does create a very, very strong mood, and I thought that was working very, very well.
Yes.
It does certainly, and I'm sure we'll get into it, does have some faults, especially as we get toward the end. But I'm not sure it deserves all the bad press that it's getting.
Well, I should say, too, 4.9 is what the users of Internet Movie Database vote, and that's 42,730 people have voted. Anybody can go in there, though, and vote. So you have to look at that with a little bit of a grain of salt. But I find it's fairly reliable what people thought of it. So you're right. It is a 5 out of 10, basically.
Most of the reviewers at the time in the papers were giving it 2 out of 5.
Oh, wow.
I'm not sure I could go above a 3 out of 5. What are some of your favorite scenes from the movie?
Because it's a complete rethinking of the original premise, it probably let many viewers down because it didn't have Michael Myers.
He does actually appear somewhere.
You're kidding me.
I think it's on the TV.
Oh, that would be fun. I'll have to go find that. I must have missed that. My favorite scenes would be probably with the TV stuff. To me, that was so cool because in the 80s, I can remember staying up late, babysitting or something, and it'd be these late night shows. I remember there was one called Night Flight. These cable shows, sometimes they were local access shows, but they were low budget. It really reminded me of that. I liked that aspect of it. And whenever I saw the TVs, it just reminded me of the 80s so much. That really drew me in. What did you think about the TV stuff?
This is going to sound negative. I thought it was very cheap, but it was supposed to be. That is the way the commercial probably would look at the time. So it basically has this sort of 1980s feel for a really cheap looking commercial. It uses, I believe, London Bridge is Falling Down as the song, as the music, because they didn't want to pay royalties when they wrote the jingle for The Mask.
And there's one thing in here, too, that I would like to draw attention to. You were talking about my favorite scenes. For some reason, I'm drawing a blank because I just like the whole movie for what it is. But the TV stuff was amazing. And then also the fact that this reimagined Halloween involved robots like Westworld and a mind control campaign. That's always awesome, especially when it comes from children, that utilizes television. Even more so now, we're all looking at television all the time. But back then, that kind of thing was reminiscent of George Orwell's 1984. And I like the idea of a TV controlling people.
I like your idea, the George Orwell reference type of television commercial, that it is going to control what happens ultimately to these kids. I think it is a very strong opening, with the man running and getting to the gas station, ending up in the hospital, then someone coming in, a man in a suit. All the men in the suit just looked so Aryan, Nazi, terrifying sort of CIA, FBI people coming in, murdering him, and then going out to the car, setting himself ablaze and setting the car on fire, and there's this big explosion. So I thought the opening was really very strong, well written, excellently done, excellently shot.
Yeah.
I also found the curfew scene with the announcement of it's 6:30, it is now curfew, everybody go inside. I found this very mysterious, very intriguing, very interesting, very moody, somewhat scary. Of course, at the same time, once that scene was over, I went, why is there curfew?
Yeah.
What is going on in this
They
town?
didn't explain it at that point.
Yeah, what is going on in this town that they actually need a curfew? And nothing really seemed to happen that suggested that a curfew was absolutely necessary.
Yeah.
And also, immediately after that, there's still people out on the street where the central character is buying
Yeah, they're just ignoring the
stuff at a
curfew.
liquor store. So
I think with this one, I might rewrite my review that I wrote 2, 3 years ago. I just think it's underrated. People should see this movie. I definitely recommend this to horror fans. I think it's a must see.
well, it might be interesting to talk then some about how it came about
Yeah.
and why they made the movie. After the second Halloween film, theoretically, Michael Myers was supposed to be dead. He definitely was dead.
Yeah.
So John Carpenter and, of course, I can't remember the name of the other producer, wanted to keep the franchise going, but their idea was now not to continue it on with Michael Myers, but every Halloween to have a totally different Halloween movie,
Yeah.
to make it a sort of serial with every year being different, which I thought was a great idea. I wish they would have done that for the second Halloween instead of waiting till the third Halloween. That may have been one of the mistakes they made because, of course, everybody wanted Michael Myers to come
Yes.
back. But they went with this instead. The movie actually did not lose money. It actually made a nice profit. The problem is it didn't make anywhere near the profit of the first two. So the whole idea was dropped of doing a series of Halloween movies until some years later they brought Michael Myers back and they did another Halloween movie. But I do think people expected this to be a Michael Myers movie, and no, he's not in it. Has absolutely nothing at all to do with the first
Except
two
maybe
movies.
that one scene that you were referring to.
Right.
Definitely.
Yeah, appears on television. There are other little connections to it, like people involved in both and things of that nature. But yes, it's totally independent. And I thought it was a very clever idea, this idea of creating these masks that were going to do something to these kids on Halloween night. But I also think maybe that is where the movie, to a certain degree, starts having problems. It just gets very complicated at the end as to what's going on. Mm-hmm. On one hand, as you say, he's creating robots and androids, but that's not what he's doing with the kids.
No.
And instead, he's just killing the kids. He says these masks that they're going to go off and they're going to kill all these kids. And he's doing it because he wants to make some sacrifice that goes way back to Stonehenge time. And it starts off with a news report of one of the Stonehenge monoliths being stolen and nobody knows where it is. And it ends up being at this warehouse where they make the mask. And as one reviewer said, if your movie is starting out with stealing a Stonehenge monolith and managing somehow to get it all the way across the ocean and all the way across the United States to the small town outside of Los Angeles, you might be having some problems with plotting that you might want to rethink.
Yeah. Oh, I just wanted to follow up on something you said. I went ahead and looked it up. Deborah Hill is the other producer.
Deborah Hill and John Carpenter were also, I believe, producers on the first two.
I'm
Halloween
really
films.
surprised that he went for it, aren't you?
Well, I think it was this idea.
Oh,
Yes, and
that
Deborah
makes
Hill.
sense.
Yeah, I
Then
think
why didn't he direct it?
Well, that I don't know.
It's almost like he was trying to move the franchise a different way.
Right. He wanted to move the franchise a different way, but then he had his own movies that he wanted to make as well. Yeah. Yes, why he didn't direct it, I don't know, but he only wanted to produce it.
I didn't notice this, but Deborah Hill co-wrote 4 of his films: Halloween, The Fog, Escape from New York, and Escape from LA. So they wrote and produced Halloween 2 together. In other words, she's had a huge background with John Carpenter.
Right. They've worked a lot together. What did you think of this whole idea of the plot at the end and how it all comes together and the big explanation that it's some sort of sacrifice and things of that nature?
That was interesting to me, but I was more interested in the fun of it. Mm-hmm. I don't even think they needed it to be that intricate. I mentioned Westworld. I love robots in movies. There's one that came out recently with Alicia Vikander, plays the robot.
Ex Machina.
I loved Ex Machina because it's just the thought of when they just touch those zeros and ones, those computers are just dealing with all those zeros and ones. But if they just get too far and they become self-actualized, thoughtful, that freaks me out. And I think we're not far from it. That we could have these things getting their own ideas and going around and killing people. The ending was great, played into that.
The movie also gets a bit complicated or doesn't make a lot of sense in other areas as well. As one critic pointed out, the commercial in California or for standard time, I think was supposed to be at 9 o'clock. Well, this means it's going to start at 12 o'clock in New York. Well, by that time, all the kids are in bed. They're out of it. If you started at 9 o'clock in New York,
didn't even think of that,
where the kids all end up getting attacked by the mask and getting killed by these masks at 9, then the hour differences, it's not going to get past Eastern Standard Time. And of course, this can't be worldwide.
Yeah.
It also goes on the basis that nobody buys any other mask except these. They kept it to one large community.
Yeah.
Where all the kids in that one community were going to wear these masks because everybody tends to work for this company that produces this mask. Something like that might have worked a little better. But once you start trying to make it all across the U.S. or even across the world, then it really doesn't quite make sense. So the whole plot.
Did you think of that back then, or did you think of that now? I think you're seeing that through modern eyes. When I was a kid, I didn't really think much about other people's time zones.
I certainly agree with you that probably people who watched it at the time, for the most part, didn't even think about that. This did come from a critic at the time who said, wait, this doesn't quite make sense. But I do agree that even I didn't even think about that. I did think, even at the time, why is everybody in the United States only wearing these 3 masks when growing up at Halloween, nobody would all wear the same thing.
I almost want to mute my microphone because I'm about to bust up laughing. That is so true. Every kid going around is going to have 3 masks.
And they're so expensive, not everybody can even afford to buy them because they're very specialty items.
Yeah.
They did bring them out to accompany the movie, and they were like $65. Back in the 80s, I'm not going to spend $65 for a mask.
That's amazing.
Why do you think it didn't quite do so well? What do you think happened?
I want to look at the director just for a second because I think it relates to that question. His name was Tommy Lee Wallace. It doesn't ring a bell with me. He's done a lot of stuff since the film, if you look it up, but none of it was blockbuster material. But I find no fault in that because how many times can you watch movies like Die Hard? So I don't find him at fault that he didn't go huge with this, that he didn't go huge after this. He directed 2 episodes of the original made-for-TV It, which is pretty great. It's not as in-your-face gore as the movie that just came out, but if anybody hasn't seen it, it's more of a Stephen King feel to it. I give him huge props for that. Unfortunately, Halloween 3 lacks the sensibility of the original, the formula of, quote, The Shape. We're not talking about that movie, but they call Michael Myers The Shape, and that's from the very beginning in the script. I would have wanted to see that if I was on the heels of Halloween 1 and 2. I would want to see him too, so I'm sure a lot of people got let down. But I think they pulled Tommy Lee Wallace in because they wanted to do something totally different. Maybe even quirky and maybe even cultish almost. It's very low budget looking. The only thing for me that made it stand out that it actually was a high budget movie was that sheriff. And I don't know his name, but whenever I see him, I think, oh, this is a straight ahead film. Other than that, it was like, this is just maybe somebody's first film.
He had worked with John Carpenter before in a technical area. Yeah, he was the art director on Assault on Precinct 13.
Oh, yes.
And then associate art director on Dark Star.
Okay.
He was also an editor on The Fog and Halloween. So he had been working with John Carpenter for a while. Okay. He at first really didn't want to do the movie. I can't remember exactly why, but it didn't interest him. But he did eventually agree to do it, and it was an opportunity to do a movie. The original script was written by Nigel Neal, who was responsible for the screenplays for the Quatermass series in England. They liked what he had done with those films, so they asked him to write an original screenplay for this. But what happened, according to Neal, is that Dino De Laurentiis, who was the producer, the big overall producer, and owner of the film's distribution rights, he didn't really like the original screenplay. He wanted a lot more graphic violence. He wanted a lot more gore.
He was like that, okay.
Because he thought it would do better at the box office. Much of the plot remained the same, but at the same time, Neal didn't like a lot of the alterations. He didn't like the addition of all of the violence and the gore, so he asked that his name be removed. At that point, John Carpenter did a revision, and then Tommy Lee Wallace came on and did a revision. And somewhere along the line, the script probably started to suffer. And though it starts out very well, yes, by the end, the screenplay gets a little overcomplicated, over the top. It's not quite as satisfying as it was. What do you think of the ending? They did shoot 3 different endings.
Oh, okay. Didn't know that.
When he's on the telephone, one is a completely happy ending where he stops it completely. Oh, the one is where he definitely doesn't stop it at all.
The whole world is doomed.
And then the third one, which is the one they use now, leaves it somewhat ambiguous. He is able to stop it in all areas except one station.
Is there a DVD available that has the other endings, or was that just from the cutting room floor?
I haven't read anything that they omitted from the film is still available. It would be interesting to see. Tom Atkins, who played Dr. Chalice, said he preferred the ending that they used because he liked the idea that there was at least some hope that they might have been able to stop it from airing. At the same time, I didn't believe that anything this mad guy would be saying over the phone would stop any of them from airing their commercial at all. But in the film, he definitely stops 3 television stations.
I didn't really need a big tying it all together ending or something like that. But that's really interesting that they had 3 different ideas and they went with the ambiguous one. Maybe it's just because I prefer dark literature and movies and stuff. I like the darker side because I think it portrays more the way I look at things. I'll admit it. But also, I think it's more intellectual when you look at what could happen in the nature of humankind and things like that. You see that a lot in horror. I don't really like it that they left it ambiguous. I kind of wish... Here's a mushroom cloud. Okay, we're done.
The New York Times reviewer, Vincent Canby, said at the time, Halloween 3 manages the not easy feat of being anti-children, anti-capitalism, anti-television, and anti-Irish all at the same time.
Where did you get the anti-Irish part?
Because it's all based on this legend and myth back in Ireland revolving around Stonehenge. Some of the original worship practices at the time that have sort of made their way into the way we celebrate Halloween today.
The Druids and all that, yeah.
So with that, here's some more information about the movie. On a budget of $2.5 million, Halloween 3 made a profit by grossing $14.4 million at the box office. But it was also the poorest performing film in the Halloween series at the time, so they brought back Mike Myers for the next Halloween. And then the most recent Halloween was Halloween 20 or Halloween H2O with a lot of the original stars. Nick Castle as Michael Myers does make a cameo appearance. I think he is on the television at some point. Jamie Lee Curtis is, as I understand it, the voice of the curfew announcer. People have claimed that she is the voice of the telephone service provider who keeps telling the characters that keep trying, call again, call back, call again. Oh. But I understand she is not, and even she has said no, she is not. You're right, this was the directorial debut of Tommy Lee Wallace. Dan O'Herlihy, who plays the owner of the warehouse that manufactures the Halloween mask, is perhaps most famous for playing Robinson Crusoe, the Louis Buñuel film for which he got an Oscar nomination. He was also the old man in the RoboCop movies. In Failsafe, he played the pilot who bombs New York at the very end. And then in The Last Starfighter, he's one of the aliens, one of the generals that lead the attack. So he's someone who's been around forever. He has millions of listings on IMDb, especially for television. Maddie Norman, who plays the nurse in the opening scenes at the hospital, is perhaps best known as Joan Crawford's caretaker in the movie Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. Tom Atkins, who plays the doctor, the lead character, and Garn Stevens, who played Marge Gutman, the woman that is in the hotel with them and gets killed by the mask. They were husband and wife at the time. Nancy Keys, who played Chalice's ex-wife in the movie, was expecting her child with the film's director, Tommy Lee Wallace. They were man and wife. And Nancy Keys had appeared in the first 2 Halloween films as Laurie Strode's promiscuous friend, Annie Brackett. The fictional town of Santa Mira, where the warehouse is located, was the name of the town that was the setting for Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Halloween 3's subtitle comes from George A. Romero's second film, Season of the Witch, but the plot has nothing to do with the film. And Tommy Lee Wallace is the commercial announcer on the television. With that, let's get to my selection.
Perfect.
And that is The 5,000 Fingers of Dr. T. First, some information about the film. It was released in 1953 and was directed by Roy Rowland, with screenplay and lyrics written by Theodore Gazelle, or as he's credited in the movie and is more commonly known, Dr. Seuss. It stars Peter Lint-Hayes, Mary Healy, Hans Conried, Tommy Rettig, and Henry Kolke. The basic premise revolves around a young boy who hates practicing piano and his snobbish, tyrannical teacher. After falling asleep while practicing, he wakes up in a mysterious musical institute to find his teacher preparing for a piano recital of 500 boys, hence the title, 5,000 Fingers, his mother hypnotized by and engaged to his piano teacher, and a plumber who had been repairing a sink at his house, now becoming his only hope to save his mother and stop his teacher's diabolical plan of making the 500 students play piano forever. What did you think of the pairing of the two films?
I was wondering why you picked this one, only because it's not scary, because Halloween, but I like the connection with the children. That I get that completely. And some of Dr. Seuss stuff is kind of dark, depending on how you look at it. Depending on how you watch the movie, you can look at it like a Danny Kaye movie, or you can look at it like, what's going on here with Dr. Seuss? What's he really trying to say? And apparently he was forced to play piano.
Probably, yes, I could imagine. That would be a big reason. I sort of looked at it as, since I'm the host, I didn't have to obey the rules. So
Good.
I didn't necessarily have to choose a horror film.
When you said the 5,000 Fingers, I had never heard of it. And I'm really into Dr. Seuss. Trust me. I was a teacher for 20 years in the top third and fourth grade. So lots of times I'd be reading the students Dr. Seuss. I'm really into him. He's my hero. So I watched this bated breath, just waiting for every scene. And it was good. I enjoyed it.
When did you first see the film?
A couple days ago. I learned that it was the only movie that he wrote. He wrote the lyrics.
Right.
He's not a music guy, so he didn't do the music.
So what did you think upon seeing it? I know you talked about that some, but what was your impression about seeing it?
It was so awesome. Because when I saw this kid playing the piano that was so long, I couldn't help but remember my own torture. Come on, Damien, it's time to go to your piano lesson. I'm a piano player. Not much, but I can hold my own. So I have my parents to thank for that, because they did force me to get in there and do it. But that's an adult looking back. When I was a kid, I hated going to piano practice. So when I saw this kid being forced to get on that piano, and I saw all this long, long piano, just like you'd see in any Dr. Seuss book, I thought that was really neat, and it really drew me in. So I enjoyed it. I must admit, my daughters, who are 13 and 15, and my wife, I don't want to give her a bad rep here, but they did not like it. They said, when is that going to be over? They kept saying. But for me, I just felt like I was in a paradise. I loved it.
I first saw it, and there's sort of an interesting story connected to it, because as you say, it is not a scary movie. I had heard of it before I saw the movie, probably because, like you, when I was very young, I was a big fan of Dr. Seuss. So as I was getting into movies and wanting to watch more and more movies, somewhere along the line, I discovered that he had written a movie, and the premise sounded very, very interesting. But the first opportunity I had to see it, we had, like most places, on Saturday night at 10:30, some sort of local station that didn't only show scary film and horror film. They had their own local person dress up as sort of like a vampire or some sort of horror character who would introduce it and come back during commercials, tell jokes. And in Corpus Christi, Texas, I can't remember the name of it, but we had our own local person who did that as well. And I saw that they had scheduled the 5,000 Fingers of Dr. T for this show. And my first thought was, why are they scheduling this show? It's not a horror movie.
Funny.
The show begins, and this guy comes out who looks like a vampire and says things like, "Are you ready to be scared? Are you ready to be terrified?" And I'm thinking, well, no, because it's not a scary movie and it's not a horror movie. The show starts. And then we get to the commercial, and you can see it in the poor guy's eyes. He has realized that this is not a horror film. He doesn't know what to do. All he can do is say things like, well, are you scared? Aren't you terrified? And you can see his eyes that he's thinking, I'm going to kill the person who scheduled this movie because it's not a horror movie.
Oh, how funny.
So it was kind of fun to watch this poor guy.
So he was like kind of an Elvira, right?
Right, yes. Every place had them.
People don't realize that when we were younger, I don't want to make it sound like we're super old, but 3 decades ago, maybe.
About
There was
5
only
decades ago.
there was 8 to 13 channels.
Well, when I was growing
That was
up,
it?
there were 4.
Oh, jeez.
There was ABC, NBC, CBS, PBS, and then you had a local station. It was like WGN or something like that. And they would show a lot of reruns. But yes, at that time, you didn't have as many places where you could watch movies.
What did you think of this film?
I think it's a film that is hit and miss. It is a famous flop. It flopped big time. When they had the premiere, people were walking out after 15 minutes. They then took the film, started reshooting scenes. They dropped 9 musical numbers. They ended up with this. And I realized that it doesn't work. I agree with the audience. But there are a lot of things I do like about it. It has an incredible set decoration. The Dr. Seuss inspired sets are just marvelous. You keep talking about this huge piano. It's a 2-tier piano that goes in a curve. Big enough. Well, originally you're supposed to be able to have 500 boys sit at it. Of course, they didn't have enough money to get that. I think they only could get up to 250. It is this huge, huge thing. And you have stairways like you would find in the Dr. Seuss book. There's a sign on a stairway that says up, and it goes up to the very top, but it just ends. If you step off, you just fall down 500 feet or whatever. There's a sign at the top that points down and just says down. All very much Dr. Seuss. That aspect of it works very, very well. And there are some marvelous songs to it.
Yeah.
I like the Get Together Weather song where the 3 central characters all sing it together. Perhaps the best song and the best scene for me is when Hans Conried, as Dr. Terwilliger, sings the dressing song.
I vaguely remember that, but yes, his character fascinated me. I kept thinking, who is that?
It's Hans Conried, and he does steal the show. He's the main reason to see this movie.
I agree.
I believe, though I cannot find verification of it, that they parodied this song in one of the Simpsons episodes where Mr. Burns, it's also a parody of 101 Dalmatians where he's kidnapping all these dogs in order to make clothes out of them. He sings the song while getting dressed, and this was a direct parody, my memory is, of the 5,000 Fingers of Dr. T.
He was Captain Hook in Peter Pan.
That's right. Captain Hook is one of his major claims to fame. Hans Conried was really, really enthusiastic about the role. And he said, I had never had any such part before, never have since, and probably never will again. If it had been a success with my prominent part in the title role, it would have changed my life.
Wow.
But instead, it was a big flop. And when I watch it, though there are all these things I like about it, and all these things I find really interesting about it, I do try to figure out what it is that doesn't work and why it didn't really connect with the audience. A couple of things, though I like Peter Lynn Hayes and Mary Healy, who play his mother and the plumber, and I think they have really nice chemistry together. They really can't sing all that well, and they can't dance all that well, and don't really bring a lot of excitement to the movie either. Though the songs are a lot of fun, there's this one big dance number, some people coming out and playing instruments.
The whole thing is really choreographed to the max, you know?
Yes, but it's sort of flat in comparison to other musicals, never really goes anywhere. I sometimes think it's the music. It's just not a very interesting piece of music.
There's not many hooks. Yeah, there's not many memorable hooks like you might see nowadays, like Mamma Mia.
So I think the direction may have been a little lifeless. The direction of the movie as a whole maybe just couldn't figure out exactly how to make this movie come to life. And I can't say it's because it was reshot and a lot of it was rewritten. They cut out 9 songs because in the preview with the original movie, people were walking out after 15 minutes. It just wasn't connecting to them. It just wasn't working. I find it an interesting failure.
So you think it's the Hans Conried and some of the other things that we've mentioned about it, they put a lot into it. And of course, Dr. Seuss wrote it, but you're saying that somehow all that stuff was kind of irrelevant because the way that the public received it.
Well, it just didn't come together in a way that connected with the audience. Today it's a cult favorite, but at the same time, you talk to most people and like you, they've never heard of it.
Yeah.
It's often hard to see. This was on the Criterion channel, so I was able to see it. But other than that, I don't think I'd be able to see it because it's really not available.
One thing I do is if I can't find something, I will either rent it through Amazon or I will actually buy the DVD through Amazon. And actually this one, I did buy it. And it came quick. It came like in 3 days. So I have it now.
I don't think it's available on Amazon because I think I
Oh,
checked
really?
it. Well, you
I
bought
got
it.
it from a guy who just, I don't know, maybe he has a pawn shop or something, but he had it. He sent it to me. So,
But as we said, there are some really nice things about it. And the set direction is quite incredible, and so is the cinematography. The production designer was Rudolph Sternhed, and the art director was Carrie O'Dell. And I think they did a marvelous job of recreating a Dr. Seuss atmosphere.
yeah, it looks like what they've done now with the Lorax and some of these other films that they've made into films that were his children's books. They do that real well, like The Grinch, all the little town and the faces of the people and everything. They put a lot of time and expense into that, and it's neat. But to see it back then, when you can just see his fingerprint on certain things, like the piano, that could be right out of The Places You'll Go. So it's neat to see that they were trying to reflect his artistry in the film.
Dr. Seuss himself regarded the film as a debaculous fiasco, and he omitted mentioning it in his official biography. He even stated after the film, "Hollywood is not suited for me, and I am not suited for it."
That says it all right there. You can't just do whatever you want and have everybody get it. He became famous doing what he wanted to do in books, and boy, what an amazing, he's just taught all of us how to read. But no matter how much people love Dr. Seuss, which I'm sure they did back then as much as they do now, if we're going to go out and pay our $2, $3, whatever it was back then, we want it to be something that we can access. And I think that's the problem. You can't really access it unless you just give up your filter and you say, this is Theodore Geisel. This is Dr. Seuss. I'm just going to soak it in. And that's what I did.
I think it's just one of these movies where we'll never quite be sure why it doesn't work. We can make guesses. We can try to have theories as to why it doesn't connect with the audience. But even as you said, it wasn't working for your children. It wasn't working for your wife.
Right.
People just tend to find it, I think, boring. There probably is an issue with the pacing as well, but there is just something missing. And it's unfortunate because there is so much of it that I do like. Such a great idea. It's a young kid's point of view of not wanting to play the piano. This nightmare idea, expressing it through a dream where this piano teacher is going to take 500 boys and make them play piano constantly and never stop, which is a great idea for a movie. But somehow he just couldn't quite communicate it in a way that it was working for the audience. So now it's a cult film, and cult films are often very, very, very imperfect. And the reason why they're popular is because we look past their faults. We see a lot of their virtues and ignore a lot of the rest of it.
The more accustomed we become to movies, the more we are open to getting things. So I got this movie. I thought this movie was great. It was funny. It had music. It's one of those just chill out and just take it all in, let it kind of wash over you. It's Dr. Seuss. So how can you not love it?
Exactly. With that, here's some more information about the film. Peter Lentz and Mary Healy, who played the plumber and the boy's mother, were real-life husband and wife. And they often worked together, and they actually had a television series that ran for a year that they starred in. Tommy Redding, who plays the lead, was, of course, the first Jeff Miller in 3 seasons of Lassie on CBS. That is actually what I remember him most from. Marilyn Monroe actually accompanied him at the film's premiere. The singing voice of Tommy Redding was dubbed by Tony Butala. Tony Butala was the founder of the singing group The Lettermen. He's also one of the boys at the piano, somewhere in that whole mass of people.
No way.
Well, he is also now the only original member of the Lettermen as well. The score was composed by Frederick Hollander with lyrics by Dr. Seuss, and it earned an Oscar nomination for Best Scoring of a Musical Picture. Henry Kolke as Strugo, who was one of the guards. He's probably best known now as one of the cast members of Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. George Chakiris, who won the Oscar for West Side Story, I didn't see him, but he is one of the dancers in the big, huge dance number with all the instruments. Terry Wilson, who is also one of the guards, is a British actor who bills himself as Hollywood's ugliest man. Hans Conried is also, as you said, known for being the voice of Dr. Hook in Peter Pan, but he's also well known for playing Uncle Tanoose on The Danny Thomas Show and Snidely Whiplash in the Rocky and Bullwinkle cartoon series. And as I read, The Simpsons' Matt Groening has admitted to taking much inspiration for the 5,000 Fingers of Dr. T. When creating The Simpsons, Bart is supposedly named after the film's hero, because he's called Bart here. And the spiky yellow hairdo that Bart has might be a reference to the Happy Fingers cap that Tommy Reddick wears throughout his adventure, because he wears this
hand on it. Yeah.
cap with the yellow hand that reaches out with the 5 fingers. In closing out, is there anything that you would like to add about this film or Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, or both films together?
I think they're both great. I would say Halloween Season of the Witch would be a nice one if you're going to have anybody over. As far as the 5,000 Fingers movie, neat film, but not for everybody.
With that, let's start closing out, and I ask you to choose a film or two to go with your choice that might interest our audience.
Look at Halloween 3, the Season of the Witch, on par with Child's Play. I think if you think of that type of subgenre, then you're going to really take it for what it's supposed to be. Or an episode of The $6 Million Man. We're going to show really fake robot equipment. We're going to take people's eyes out and see what's in there. Westworld is another one. Anything robot related. Ex Machina is another one.
I'll choose one film, and that is Invaders from Mars. This is a 1953 sci-fi film directed by the great art director William Cameron Menzies. After witnessing a UFO landing not far from his home, a little boy begins to notice that people all around him, beginning with his mother and father, are being taken over and controlled by aliens, but no one will believe him. This is a somewhat underrated sci-fi film that has grown in stature over the years. So what is next? What should we be looking for from you?
More horror. I've got like about 4 right now on my watch list I'm really excited about. I can tell you what they are, but you know what? You probably won't even know them because they're all independent films and they're not being released in a normal way. So I would just say, check out Riley on Film. One thing that I try to do is look at the movies that are not mainstream. I have a couple sources now that are giving me horror movies like that, so that's kind of fun. And then I could check them out and review them on my site. If you want to see some kind of independent type horrors, that's what I'm going to be doing for at least 4 weeks. RileyOnFilm.com.
Great. As for me, I'll go through my usual litany. I'm a screenwriter and screenplay consultant. So I have a Howard Kasner screenplay consultation page on Facebook. I also have a blog called Rantings and Ravings, where I talk about issues related to screenwriting and movies. I published 2 books of short stories on Amazon, The Starving Artist and Other Stories, and The 5 Corporations and One True Religion. These are sci-fi, fantasy, and supernatural short stories. I have published the 2nd edition of my screenwriting book, More Rantings and Ravings of a Screenplay Reader, on Amazon, and I'm an amateur photographer, and you can find those on Instagram. The previous podcast was with writer, director, producer Drew Hall, where we discussed Snatch and Mel Brooks' The 12 Chairs, about groups of people desperately trying to find some precious jewels. The next episode will be with blogger and film enthusiast Kurt Headley, where we will be discussing Jurassic Park and the Frankenstein trilogy, Frankenstein, Bride of, and Son of, films about scientists who try to play God. With that, I want to thank you, Damien, for being a guest on my show and coming back and being a guest again, and especially on my Halloween show.
I'll come back as much as you will have me.